Family can be your greatest supporters or your deepest wound. For 15 years, my parents made me sleep in the unfinished basement during Christmas, while my sister got my childhood bedroom. When their investment fund collapsed and they faced bankruptcy, I showed up at their door with a check that changed everything, but not in the way they expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston as the eldest, daughter of Richard and Diane Caldwell, meant living with impossibly high standards. Our Victorian home on Maple Avenue was featured in local magazines twice for my mother's impeccable interior design. My father's investment firm managed portfolios for the city's elite, and appearances were everything. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family, successful parents, 2 daughters excelling in school, and a golden retriever named Windsor who completed the Norman Rockwell painting that was our carefully curated life. I'm Olivia Caldwell, 34, and until recently I was the family disappointment. Not because I'd failed in any conventional sense. I graduated with honors from Northeastern University, built a tech startup from scratch, and lived comfortably in my Seattle loft apartment. By most standards, I'd done well for myself. But in the Caldwell family, well wasn't good enough when my younger sister Rebecca existed. Rebecca was the golden child from the moment she was born. 3 years my junior, she had the kind of effortless charm and beauty that made people gravitate toward her. While I was awkward with my nose always in a book, Rebecca was captain of the cheerleading squad. When I struggled through calculus, she seemed to absorb complex math without opening a textbook. My father called her his natural-born businesswoman when she started selling homemade friendship bracelets at age 9. She got my instincts, he'd say proudly, never mentioning that I'd started coding websites for local businesses at age 12. The pattern was established early. Rebecca's achievements were celebrated with expensive dinners and extravagant gifts. My accomplishments received a perfunctory, "good job," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to my sister. When we both made honor roll, my parents took Rebecca out for ice cream to celebrate her finally catching up to her potential. I stayed home to finish my science project, but nothing exemplified my position in the family hierarchy more clearly than our Christmas traditions. Every year, the Caldwell home transformed into a winter wonderland. My mother hired professional decorators to adorn every inch of our 5,000-square-foot house with garlands, lights, and heirloom ornaments. The 12-foot Norwegian spruce in our foyer was featured in the local paper's holiday home section 3 years running. Our celebrations were legendary, with up to 40 guests attending Christmas Eve dinner each year. Family from across the country would descend upon our home for the week between Christmas and New Year's. Cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, everyone would stay with us rather than booking hotel rooms. Family stays with family, my mother would insist, though her definition of family seemed selective at best. And that's where the basement came in. When I was 19 and home from my freshman year at college, my mother pulled me aside 3 days before Christmas. "Olivia, Aunt Meredith and Uncle Philip are bringing the twins this year, and we need to make accommodations. Rebecca needs her space for all her activities with her high school friends, so we'll need you to stay in the basement for the holidays." Our basement wasn't finished. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, and a persistent smell of mildew. Dad had talked about converting it into a home theater for years but never got around to it. There was an old pull-out sofa down there, surrounded by boxes of old tax documents and holiday decorations that didn't make the cut for my mother's perfect displays. "The basement?" I asked, stunned. "Can't the twins stay down there? Or maybe Rebecca and I could share her room? We did it when we were kids." My mother's face hardened. "Rebecca needs her privacy. She's hosting the debate team's holiday party tomorrow, and she needs space to prepare. Besides, you're only here for a week, and you spend most of your time on that laptop anyway." That first night in the basement, I cried silently into a musty pillow, listening to the sounds of laughter and Christmas music drifting down through the heating vents. The basement was freezing. The only heat came from a small space heater that made alarming clicking noises throughout the night. I wore 3 layers of clothing to bed and still woke up with numb fingers. I told myself it was just for 1 year. A fluke, an emergency situation with the unexpected extra guests. I was wrong. The next Christmas, despite having fewer guests, I was directed to the basement again. "You're used to it now," my father said dismissively when I protested. And, "Rebecca needs the good guest room for her Yale interviewer who's stopping by on the 27th. The pattern continued, year after year. Even after I graduated and started my own company, even after I could afford luxury hotel rooms, I was relegated to the basement during holiday visits. It became a running joke among the extended family. "Where's Olivia sleeping?" someone would inevitably ask, and my mother would wave vaguely toward the basement door with a tight smile. "She's fine down there. She doesn't mind." But I did mind. I minded deeply. Each Christmas basement stay was another reminder that I was an afterthought in my own family. Each year, I promised myself it would be the last time I'd subject myself to such treatment. Yet each November, the sense of obligation would creep in, and I'd find myself booking a flight back to Boston, hoping things might be different. They never were. By my early 30s, I'd built Nexus Innovations into a respected software company specializing in healthcare management systems. We weren't a unicorn startup with billions in valuation, but we were profitable, ethical, and making a genuine difference in patient care across the country. I had 28 employees who looked to me for leadership, a downtown Seattle loft with views of Puget Sound, and a life filled with purpose and achievement. Yet every Christmas, I morphed back into the overlooked daughter shivering on a pull-out couch surrounded by dusty holiday decorations and my father's old golf clubs. Last Christmas was the breaking point. I'd just closed a major contract with a hospital chain that would expand our software to 17 new locations. It was the biggest deal of my career, representing 3 years of development work and countless late nights. When I called my parents to share the news, my father answered, distractedly, "That's nice, Olivia. Listen, can I call you back? Rebecca just got a promotion at Goldman Sachs, and we're taking her to Le Bernardin to celebrate. Your mother's just putting on her coat." They never called back. 2 weeks later, I received my mother's annual Christmas email detailing the sleeping arrangements. "As usual, we've put you in the basement," she wrote. "We've added a new space heater since you mentioned being cold last year." Something in me snapped. 10 minutes later, I had canceled my flight to Boston and booked a solo trip to Hawaii instead. I spent Christmas morning on a sun-drenched beach in Maui, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise. For the first time in years, I felt at peace during the holidays. No walking on eggshells, no backhanded compliments about my modest career, no freezing basement nights listening to Rebecca, holding court upstairs. I sent my parents a brief email. "Decided to do something different this year. Merry Christmas from Hawaii." I attached a photo of my beach view. My phone rang almost immediately. "What do you mean you're in Hawaii?" My mother's voice was shrill, with indignation. "The whole family is here expecting to see you. Grandmother Mitchell asked where you were, and I had to make up some excuse about work. You've embarrassed us, Olivia." I needed a break, Mom. A break from what? From family? From tradition? "That's so selfish of you." I nearly laughed at the irony. "Tradition? You mean my tradition of sleeping in the basement while everyone else gets actual bedrooms?" "Not this again," she sighed. "You know we don't have enough space for— You have 6 bedrooms, Mom, 6. And somehow I always end up on a pull-out couch next to the water heater." "You're being dramatic. The basement isn't that bad." "Then why has no one else ever stayed there? Not once in 15 years? The line went quiet for a moment. I didn't call to argue, she finally said. Your father wants to talk to you. There was a rustling as the phone changed hands. Olivia. My father's businessman voice, the one he used for difficult clients. This behavior is unacceptable. Your absence has upset your grandmother, and now Rebecca is crying. I'm sorry about grandmother, I said, meaning it. My grandmother had always been kind to me, sneaking me extra dessert and slipping 20s into my pocket. But I find it hard to believe Rebecca is crying over my absence. She's never shown much interest in seeing me before. That's unfair. Your sister looks up to you. Another lie to add to the pile. Rebecca hadn't looked up to me since we were children. Now she mainly looked through me, except when making thinly veiled comments about how my company was cute compared to her investment banking career. Dad, I'm not coming. I'm taking care of myself for once. This is about the basement, isn't it? He lowered his voice, probably to keep others from hearing. You've always been so sensitive. It's just a sleeping arrangement, for God's sake. It's not just about the basement. It's about 15 years of being treated like an unwelcome houseguest in my childhood home. It's about my achievements being ignored while Rebecca gets celebrated for ordering the right salad dressing. Now you're just being childish. Your mother and I have always supported both of you equally. I closed my eyes, feeling the warm Hawaiian breeze on my face, strengthening my resolve. Dad, I have to go. My surfing lesson starts in 20 minutes. Surfing? Since when do you surf? Since today. Merry Christmas. I hung up and turned off my phone. The rest of my Hawaiian Christmas was blissful. Hiking to waterfalls, learning to surf, badly but enthusiastically, eating fresh poke by the ocean, and sleeping in a real bed in a beautiful resort. I made friends with a retired couple from Portland who invited me to join their Christmas dinner when they heard I was alone. We stayed in touch afterward. They send me gardening tips and photos of their grandchildren. When I returned to Seattle, I felt different. Lighter. As if I'd finally set down a heavy suitcase I'd been carrying for decades. I decided that my Hawaii Christmas wouldn't be a one-time escape, but the beginning of a new relationship with my family, one with boundaries and self-respect at its core. For months, I maintained minimal contact, brief text responses to my mother's messages, short calls on birthdays, but no visits, no. I focused on growing my company, made new friends through a hiking group, and even started dating a kind, funny marine biologist named Eliza, who valued my thoughts and achievements. Then, in late October, everything changed. I was in the middle of a staff meeting when my phone lit up with my father's number. My father never called during business hours. He considered it unprofessional to make personal calls during the workday. Something had to be wrong. I need to take this, I told my team, stepping into the hallway. Dad? What's happening? His voice sounded hollow, stripped of its usual confidence. Olivia, there's been a situation. He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily. The fund. There's been a collapse. What fund? What are you talking about? My investment fund. Caldwell Partners. We've lost everything. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. My father's investment firm managed millions in assets for wealthy clients, and our family's money. He'd started it 30 years ago and built it into one of Boston's most respected financial management companies. Everything? How is that possible? You're always so careful with investments. Another long pause. I made some gambles. The market turned, and there were improprieties. Improprieties? Dad, are you saying the SEC is investigating? It's going to be public soon. Your mother doesn't know the full extent yet. His voice cracked, a sound I'd never heard from my stoic father. We're going to lose the house. Everything. I sank into a chair in the hallway, my mind racing. Despite our complicated relationship, these were my parents. They were facing financial ruin and possibly legal consequences. What about Rebecca? Does she know? She's devastated. She had significant investments with the firm. Of course she did. My sister had followed in my father's footsteps, working at Goldman Sachs. She'd probably invested her considerable bonuses with Caldwell Partners, trusting our father's golden touch. I had not. When I started Nexus Innovations, my father had offered to manage my growing capital. "Let me put this money to work for you," he'd said confidently. "The returns I can get you will dwarf whatever that little software company brings in." But I'd declined. My company was my own creation, built without family connections or advantages. I wasn't about to hand control of its finances to a man who couldn't remember what my company actually did. Instead, I'd invested conservatively with a diverse portfolio managed by a Seattle firm with no connection to my family, a decision that now seemed almost prescient. "I need to go, Dad. I'll call you tonight when I'm home and we can talk about..." "What happens next?" "Olivia." He hesitated. "I know we haven't always. We'll figure it out," I said, more confidently than I felt. "Talk later." I returned to my staff meeting in a daze, somehow making it through the presentation on our new neural network feature. After work, I sat in my living room overlooking the Seattle skyline as dusk settled over the city, trying to process what this meant for my family, and for me. That night, I called my father back. He answered on the first ring, his voice low. "Your mother's asleep. She took a sedative. Tell me everything, Dad." And he did. The full story was worse than I'd imagined. My father had made increasingly risky investments trying to maintain the firm's stellar returns. When those went south, he began commingling funds, using new client money to pay returns to existing clients. A classic Ponzi scheme, though he wouldn't use that term. "I always intended to fix it," he insisted. "Just needed to make one big win to put everything back." But the big win never came. Now federal investigators were closing in. My father would likely face criminal charges. My parents would lose everything: the house, their savings, their standing in the community. My mother, who had built her identity around being a wealthy Boston socialite, would be destitute and disgraced. And Rebecca, who had invested heavily in our father's fund and whose identity was similarly built around status and appearance, would also lose her significant investments. "Have you told the family?" I asked. "Not yet. Just you and Rebecca. The news will break publicly next week when the SEC files charges. I don't know how to tell everyone." The same extended family who had gathered in our house every Christmas. The same relatives who had watched me troop down to the basement year after year, while they enjoyed the guest rooms, would soon know that the Caldwell wealth and prestige had been built on deception. "What can I do?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. My father was silent for a long moment. "Nothing. There's nothing anyone can do now." After we hung up, I sat in my darkened apartment for hours, thinking. I had achieved success on my terms, built something real and valuable. Meanwhile, my family's wealth, the source of the superiority they had always lorded over me, had been a house of cards. I could walk away. No one would blame me. After years of being the family afterthought, I had every right to let them face the consequences of my father's actions alone. But something inside me knew I couldn't do that. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my company's board of directors. 6 hours later, I was on a flight to Boston with a plan that would either heal my family or sever my ties with them forever. As the plane began its descent, I thought about all those cold Christmas nights in the basement, listening to the sounds of family warmth and connection above me. I thought about the dismissal of my achievements, the constant elevation of Rebecca, the casual cruelty masked as tradition. Then I thought about my grandmother, who had always seen me clearly and loved me anyway. "You're stronger than all of them put together," she had whispered to me one Christmas, when she found me crying in the laundry room after a particularly cutting remark from my mother. And someday they'll see it too. Maybe that day had finally arrived. The taxi pulled up to my parents' Maple Avenue address. The Victorian house looked the same, immaculate paint, perfect landscaping, but now I knew it was just a facade hiding a crumbling foundation. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gathering my courage. Then I walked up the familiar steps, carrying a slim leather portfolio containing a check that would change everything. I raised my hand and knocked on the door of my childhood home, ready to face whatever came next. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The door swung open, and I barely recognized the woman standing before me. My mother, always impeccably dressed with not a hair out of place, looked like she'd aged a decade in the month since I'd seen her last. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her silk blouse wrinkled, her signature pearl necklace conspicuously absent. "Olivia!" She blinked as if I might be a hallucination. "We weren't expecting you." "Hello, Mom." I stepped forward to hug her, but she just stood there, arms limp, at her sides. "Dad called me. I came as soon as I could." She nodded vaguely and stepped aside to let me in. The house felt different, the usual floral scent of my mother's expensive candles replaced by a heaviness in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Family photos still lined the entryway, smiling Caldwells and sailing. Attire, at ski resorts, at Rebecca's graduation. The perfect family narrative, carefully curated and displayed. "Richard is in his study," my mother said, her voice flat. "He hasn't left it in 3 days." I'd never heard her call my father Richard to me before. It had always been your father or dad, another small sign that the family's foundations were crumbling. "Where's Rebecca?" I asked, setting down my small overnight bag. My mother's face tightened. "She's staying at the Four Seasons downtown. She said she needed space to process everything." Her voice turned bitter, as if she's the only one suffering. I nodded, unsurprised. My sister had always retreated when things got difficult. In high school, she'd gone shopping in New York with friends when our grandmother was hospitalized, claiming she couldn't handle hospitals. Now, faced with family financial ruin, she had escaped to luxury accommodations while our parents faced the music alone. "I'm going to talk to Dad," I said, moving toward his study. "He won't want to see you," my mother called after me. "He doesn't want to see anyone." I ignored her and knocked on the heavy oak door of my father's study, the room that had been off-limits to me as a child, but had welcomed Rebecca whenever she wanted to learn about business. No answer came. I knocked again, harder. "I said I don't want dinner, Diane." My father's voice sounded muffled through the door. "It's Olivia, Dad. I'm coming in." I didn't wait for permission. The study was dark, lit only by the glow of my father's computer screen. The room smelled of whiskey and desperation. My father sat hunched at his desk, his silver hair unkempt, his face shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. An empty glass sat by his hand, a bottle of Macallan nearby. 3/4 empty. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. "You shouldn't have come. Yet, here I am." I crossed the room and opened the heavy curtains. Late afternoon sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes and the disorder of the usually immaculate study. Papers were strewn across the desk, and several framed certificates, my father's business awards and recognitions, had been removed from the walls and stacked in a corner. "I'm preparing to surrender my securities licenses," he said, noticing my gaze on the certificates. "Voluntarily before they're revoked." I sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Tell me everything, Dad. The full truth, not the sanitized version you gave me on the phone. He laughed hollowly. You want the truth? The truth is, I'm a fraud, a criminal. I've destroyed everything I built, betrayed people who trusted me, and ruined our family's name. His hand moved toward the whiskey bottle, but I reached across the desk and moved it out of his reach. Details, Dad. I need specifics if I'm going to help. His eyes narrowed. Help? There's no helping this, Olivia. The SEC has a rock-solid case. I've already spoken with the best criminal defense attorney in Boston, and he says the best I can hope for is a plea deal with a reduced sentence. How much did you lose? He looked away. All of it. $19 million from the fund. The family assets are going to be frozen and then liquidated for restitution. How many clients were affected? 42 investors, friends, colleagues. His voice broke. Our family. I took a deep breath. Including Aunt Catherine. My father closed his eyes, his face contorted with shame. My mother's sister, Catherine, had inherited a substantial sum when her husband died 6 years ago. On my father's advice, she had invested all of it with Caldwell Partners. She's going to lose everything, I said. It wasn't a question. Everyone is. I've ruined them all. He finally looked at me directly. Why are you here, Olivia? To witness my disgrace? To say I told you so because you were smart enough not to invest with me? I'm here because you're my father. A father who relegated you to the basement every Christmas while your sister got the guest suite. The whiskey had loosened his tongue. Don't pretend you're not enjoying this, at least a little. The old Olivia might have flinched at his accusation, might have scrambled to reassure him that she harbored no resentment. But I wasn't that person anymore. You're right, I said calmly. You were a terrible father to me in many ways. You dismissed. My accomplishments favored Rebecca shamelessly and made me feel unwelcome in my own family home. The basement was just a physical manifestation of where I stood in the family hierarchy. His face slackened with surprise. He wasn't used to directness from me. But, I continued, despite all that, I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to offer a solution. I opened my leather portfolio and slid a document across his desk. He stared at it without touching it as if it might burn him. What is this? It's a proposal. Nexus Innovations will purchase Caldwell Partners, assume all its debts, and make full restitution to the defrauded investors. His eyes widened as he finally reached for the document. This is impossible. Your company isn't large enough to— My company is doing exceptionally well, Dad. The healthcare management software market is booming, and we've just secured Series C funding that values Nexus at over $400 million. We have the capital and the cash flow to make this work. He flipped through the pages, his hands trembling slightly. This would save the clients, but it doesn't solve my legal problems. The SEC isn't going to drop criminal charges because you're bailing out the fund. Turn to page 7. He did, and I watched his expression change as he read the conditions of my proposal. Full cooperation with authorities, he read aloud. Public admission of wrongdoing. Resignation from all financial positions and surrender of all licenses. Agreement never to serve as an officer or director of any public company. He looked up at me. This is still a prison sentence, Olivia. Not necessarily. My attorneys believe that with full restitution to the victims, complete cooperation, and your acceptance of a lifetime ban from the securities industry, the prosecutor might agree to probation rather than incarceration, especially given your age and lack of prior offenses. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by suspicion. What's the catch? What do you get out of this? I leaned forward. First, I get to protect Aunt Catherine and the other innocent people you dragged down with you. Second, I prevent our family name from being completely destroyed, which matters. To me, more than I'd like to admit. And? He knew me well enough to know there was more. And I get controlling interest in the Maple Avenue property. His eyebrows shot up. The house? You want our house? The house belongs to the fund now, or it will once assets are frozen. I'm proposing to buy it as part of the overall acquisition. Why? You've never shown any attachment to this place. You've built your life across the country. I smiled slightly. Let's just say I have plans for it. My father stared at the document for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of shame, respect, and something close to awe. When did you become so formidable? He asked. I've always been formidable, Dad. You just never noticed. The door to the study opened, and my mother stood there, her expression unreadable. I couldn't help overhearing, she said, which meant she'd been listening at the door. You're offering to save us? I'm offering to mitigate the damage. I corrected. Dad will still face consequences, as he should. But yes, I can prevent complete financial ruin for the family and make the investors whole. Why would you do this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. After how we've treated you. I stood up, suddenly needing space from both of them. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and because I can. The question is whether you'll accept my help and my terms. My father looked at my mother, some unspoken communication passing between them. She gave a small nod. We'll need time to review this with our attorneys, he said, tapping. The proposal. You have until tomorrow morning, I replied. After that, the SEC files charges, and this all becomes much more complicated. Where are you staying tonight? My mother asked. I've booked a room at the Lenox Hotel. My mother actually flinched. For years, whenever I visited Boston, she had insisted I stay at their house, in the basement, of course, rather than waste money on a hotel room. Now I was staying at one of the most expensive hotels in the city, and we all knew why. We should call Rebecca, my father said. She needs to be part of this discussion. I'm sure she does. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Though, she doesn't seem very interested in being part of the family crisis, hiding out at the Four Seasons. Don't start, Olivia, my mother said sharply. She's devastated. She lost nearly $2 million in the fund. I bit back a retort about Rebecca's history of financial privileges. This wasn't the time for old grievances. Call her. Tell her to meet us for dinner at Sorellina at 8. My treat. Sorellina? My mother looked surprised at my choice of one of Boston's most expensive Italian restaurants. Might as well enjoy the finer things while we can, I said with a small smile. After all, you taught me the importance of appearances. I left them in the study and went upstairs to what had once been my childhood bedroom. After I moved out for college, my mother had converted it into a home office, removing all traces of my existence. I stood in the doorway, looking at the sleek desk and bookshelves filled with my mother's interior design books and society photographs. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Landed safely? How are the parents of the basement banisher? I smiled at her nickname for my mother. I'd told Eliza all about my family dynamics over late-night conversations and morning coffee. She'd been horrified by the basement story, unable to comprehend how parents could treat their child that way. Landed safe, I texted back. Parents, shell-shocked. Making my proposal tonight. Miss you. Miss you more. Remember, you're offering them salvation, not begging for acceptance. You hold the power now. Use it wisely, basement warrior. I laughed out loud at that, the sound echoing strangely in the house that had never heard much of my laughter. Eliza was right. I wasn't here as the family disappointment anymore. I was here as their potential savior. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we all knew it. I freshened up in the guest bathroom, not the basement, I noted with irony, and headed out to prepare for dinner. I had calls to make, details to confirm with my attorneys, and a plan to finalize before facing Rebecca. As I stood on the front porch waiting for my Uber, I gazed at the house that had never truly felt like home to me. Soon, if everything went according to plan, it would be mine. Not because I had any sentimental attachment to it, but because its fate was now part of a larger strategy, one that would either heal my family or set me free from it forever. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Across the street, a family was unloading groceries, the children laughing as they raced up the front steps. A normal family scene, the kind I'd always observed from the outside. My Uber arrived, and as I settled into the back seat, I felt a curious lightness. For years, I'd carried the weight of my family's rejection, trying to earn the love and recognition that should have been freely given. Now, having walked away, having built my own success and found people who valued me for exactly who I was returning, not as a supplicant, but as an equal. More than equal. I was returning with the power to determine my family's fate. Sorellina was as elegant as I remembered, with its warm lighting and sleek, modern Italian decor. I arrived early and requested a private dining area. The maitre d' recognized my name. The reservation had been made through my company's executive concierge service. Miss Caldwell, we're delighted to have you with us tonight. Your private dining. Room is ready, and the sommelier has selected several options based on your preferences. I was seated in a secluded corner with a view of the main dining room, a bottle of Barolo already breathing on the table. I'd chosen Sorellina deliberately. It was where my parents had taken Rebecca to celebrate her acceptance to Yale. I hadn't been invited. I was too busy with work, according to my mother. I'd seen the photos on Instagram, my sister radiant in a new dress my parents had bought for the occasion, my father raising a glass and a toast. I was reviewing a document on my tablet when I felt a presence at the table. Looking up, I saw Rebecca standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. My sister had always been the pretty one, the charming one. Tonight she looked beautiful but brittle, her designer dress hanging slightly loose on her frame, her makeup carefully applied but not quite concealing the shadows under her eyes. Olivia. She hesitated, then bent to give me an air kiss that didn't quite connect. This is unexpected. Hello, Rebecca. Please sit. Would you like some wine? She nodded and settled across from me, her movements lacking their usual confidence. I poured her a glass of the Barolo, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. Have you seen them? She asked, taking a larger sip than was proper for such an expensive wine. I came straight from the house. She winced. How bad is it? Dad's alternating between self-pity and self-loathing. Mom's in denial. The house looks the same, but it feels like all the air has been sucked out of it. Rebecca nodded, staring into her wine glass. I can't believe this is happening. Everything he built, everything we had, just gone. The we wasn't lost on me. Rebecca had always seen herself as her father's true successor, the rightful heir to the Caldwell legacy. Not necessarily gone, I said carefully. Her head snapped up. What do you mean? I have a proposal that might salvage the situation, at least partially. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion, so like our father's. What kind of proposal? Let's wait for Mom and Dad. I'd rather explain it once. Fine. She took another large sip of wine. Why are you even here, Olivia? Last I heard, you were playing Castaway in Hawaii instead of spending Christmas with your family. I smiled thinly. As opposed to you, who's playing guest at the Four Seasons while our parents face financial and social ruin alone? She flushed. That's not fair. I needed space to think. Do you have any idea how much money I lost in Dad's fund? My entire portfolio, everything. Did you ever wonder where that money came from in the first place? The seed money for your portfolio? Her flush deepened. I earned it. I work 70-hour weeks at Goldman. And before that, the money Dad gave you to start investing when you were still in college? The down payment for your New York apartment? The connections that got you the Goldman interview in the first place? What's your point? She snapped. My point is that you've been the beneficiary of family privilege your entire life, Rebecca. You've been given every advantage, while I had to build from nothing. She laughed incredulously. Is that really how you see it? Poor Olivia, the neglected daughter? Please. You were always the smart one, the capable one. You didn't need the help I did. Need the help, I repeated slowly. Is that the story you've been telling yourself? That you got the attention, the opportunities, the support because you needed it more? Before she could answer, our parents arrived. My mother had changed into a simple black dress, her hair freshly styled, attempt at normalcy through appearance. My father looked marginally better than he had earlier. He'd shaved and changed into a clean shirt, though the haunted look remained in his eyes. They sat down, my mother next to Rebecca, my father next to me. A server appeared immediately to pour wine and provide menus, then discreetly withdrew. I've ordered a selection of appetizers for the table, I said, breaking the awkward silence that had fallen. The Parmigiano soup here is exceptional. How would you know? My mother asked. You've never been here. I wasn't invited last time you all were here, I replied evenly. But that doesn't mean I haven't dined here. I bring clients here whenever I'm in Boston. My father cleared his throat. I've reviewed your proposal with our attorney. It's surprisingly thorough. My company has an excellent legal team. You're really willing to do this? Rebecca interjected. Bail out Dad's firm? Use your company's money to make the investors whole? With conditions, I reminded them. Very specific conditions. Including taking our house, my mother said tightly. The house isn't yours anymore, Mom. It belongs to the fund's creditors now, or it will once everything is frozen. I'm proposing to purchase it at fair market value as part of the overall settlement. But why? Rebecca asked. You've never cared about the house. You don't even live in Boston. I've given this a lot of thought, I said as the appetizers arrived. I waited until the server had departed before continuing. For years, I've dreamed of opening a technology education center for underserved girls. A place where they could learn coding, engineering, digital design, everything they need to enter the tech industry on equal footing. My family stared at me blankly. The Maple Avenue house is perfect for this purpose, large enough for classrooms and computer labs, a residential neighborhood but close to public transportation for students coming from other areas. The zoning allows for educational use with minimal variance requirements. You want to turn our home into a school? My mother looked horrified. A technology education center, I corrected, with dormitory space for rural students doing summer intensives. It will be called the Mitchell Center for Technology Innovation. Mitchell, my father repeated. Your grandmother's maiden name. I nodded. Grandmother always encouraged my interest in computers. She bought me my first programming books when I was 12. So this is your revenge. My mother's voice was cold. Take our home and erase the Caldwell name from it completely. This isn't about revenge, I said, though part of me couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt at their discomfort. This is about creating something positive from this situation, and about honoring the person who always saw my potential, even when the rest of you didn't. What about us? Rebecca asked. Where are we supposed to live if you take the house? The proposal includes a provision for a portion of the sale proceeds to be placed in a living expense trust. Not enough for the lifestyle you're accustomed to, but enough to secure modest housing and basic needs while Dad deals with the legal consequences and you rebuild your careers. How generous, my mother said bitterly. More generous than I needed to be. I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. I could have let you all face this alone. Dad would go to prison, you'd lose everything, and the Caldwell name would be permanently associated with financial fraud. Instead, I'm offering a path that provides some measure of redemption and restitution to the people Dad harmed. My father, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. What you're offering is remarkable, Olivia. I don't deserve your help, but the investors don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. He looked at my mother and Rebecca. We should accept. Just like that? Rebecca exclaimed. Hand over our home to be turned into some pet project of Olivia's? It's not a pet project, I said sharply. It's a legitimate educational foundation with significant backing from the tech industry. And you don't have a choice, Rebecca. The house isn't yours to keep. This feels like blackmail, my mother muttered. No, I said. This feels like consequences. For the first time in your lives, you're facing the consequences of your choices, and I'm offering you a lifeline you don't deserve. The main courses arrived, momentarily silencing our conversation. I had ordered the gnocchi with braised short ribs, but found my appetite had diminished. Why are you really doing this? Rebecca asked after the server had again withdrawn. It can't just be for Aunt Catherine and the other investors. I considered her question carefully. The truth was complex, my motivations layered. When I left here last Christmas and spent the holiday in Hawaii, I made a promise to myself that I would never again let this family define my worth. I built a life that fulfills me, with people who value me for exactly who I am. I took a deep breath. But I realized something else too. As long as I carried anger and resentment toward you, I was still letting you define me. Just in a different way. My mother looked down at her barely touched salmon. This isn't about saving you, I continued. It's about closing a chapter in my life. It's about using my success to create opportunities for girls who might otherwise be overlooked, the way I was. And yes, it's about proving to myself that I can face this family from a position of strength, not weakness. The table fell silent as they absorbed my words. For perhaps the first time, they were seeing me clearly, not as the awkward, overlooked older daughter, but as a woman who had forged her own path and created success on her own terms. I need your answer by morning, I said finally. My legal team is standing by, but we need to move quickly before the SEC files formal charges. My father nodded. You'll have our answer, but I think I can speak for all of us when I say we accept your terms, and we're grateful beyond words. Rebecca looked like she wanted to object, but a sharp glance from our father silenced her. Good. I signaled for the check. In that case, I'll have the papers delivered to the house at 9 tomorrow for signatures. After that, everything moves quickly. As the server processed my credit card, an awkward silence fell over the table. We had never been good at genuine emotion in my family, except for my sister's dramatic outbursts, which had always been indulged. Where will you stay tonight? My mother finally asked. Your room at the house. Isn't my room anymore. I finished for her. It hasn't been for a long time. I have a suite at the Lenox, as I mentioned earlier. Of course. First, she looked embarrassed, perhaps finally realizing how unwelcome they had made me feel all these years. Outside the restaurant, as we waited for our respective cars, my father turned to me. I never understood you, Olivia, he said quietly. I never took the time to try. No, you didn't, I agreed. For what it's worth, I'm proud of the woman you've become, even if I had nothing to do with it. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was genuine regret and dawning recognition of everything he had missed. Thank you for saying that, Dad. Maybe someday it will mean something to me. My car arrived first. As I moved to get in, Rebecca suddenly stepped forward and hugged me, the first real hug we'd shared in years. We were awful to you, she whispered. I was awful to you. Yes, I said simply. I don't know if we can ever make it right. I pulled back to look at her. This isn't about making it right, Rebecca. It's about moving forward, all of us. As my car pulled away, I watched them in the rearview mirror. 3 figures standing, close together on the sidewalk, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen them. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider looking in at the Caldwell family. I felt like the one who had broken free. Back in my hotel suite, I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. How did it go? They accepted, I texted back. House will be the Mitchell Center by next spring. Your grandmother would be so proud. You are incredible. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with family obligation or approval seeking. I had built this life, my successful company, my relationship with Eliza, my plans for the education center, through my own efforts and choices. The basement-dwelling daughter had emerged into the light, stronger for having navigated the darkness. Tomorrow, papers would be signed. Lawyers would file motions. The process of salvaging what could be salvaged from my father's mistakes would begin. But tonight, standing in a room I had paid for with money I had earned, looking out at the city that had once felt like a place of rejection, I felt something unexpected. I felt free. Morning brought a clarity that only comes after life-altering decisions. I woke in my hotel suite feeling oddly calm, despite the weight of what lay ahead. My legal team had worked through the night, finalizing documents and coordinating with the SEC's Enforcement Division. By noon, if all went according to plan, Nexus Innovations would officially begin the process of acquiring Caldwell Partners' assets and liabilities. The magnitude of what I was undertaking wasn't lost on me. This was a significant financial risk for my company, one that my board had only reluctantly approved after hours of intense discussion. This is business, not family therapy, my CFO had argued. But ultimately, they trusted my judgment, and the potential PR value of rescuing defrauded investors had tipped the scales. After a quick breakfast and a video call with Eliza, who offered her unwavering support despite her concerns, just don't let them hurt you again, Liv, I headed to my childhood home for what would likely be one of my last visits before it transformed into something entirely new. The morning was crisp, leaves crunching beneath my feet as I walked up the familiar path. This time, my father opened the door before I could knock. He was dressed in a suit, as if heading to the office, though we all knew he would never set foot in Caldwell Partners again. The lawyers are already here, he said by way of greeting, stepping aside to let me in. Conference room set up in the dining room. I'd brought my own legal team, 3 attorneys from my company's Boston counsel. They were already seated at one end of the dining room table, laptops open, documents arranged in precise stacks. At the other end sat my parents' attorneys, looking grave. My mother perched rigidly in a chair by the window while Rebecca paced near the fireplace. Where's your legal representation? I asked Rebecca. I'm using Dad's team, she replied, not meeting my eyes. I can't exactly afford my own lawyers anymore. I nodded and took a seat at the head of the table, a position my father had occupied for countless family dinners. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Let's begin, I said, and with those 2 words, launched a process that would irrevocably alter the Caldwell family forever. For the next 3 hours, we moved through document after document, my father signing away his control of the investment firm, my mother relinquishing claims to assets purchased with fund money, Rebecca agreeing to return certain gifts that were technically purchased with investor funds, and all of them signing off on the transfer of the Maple Avenue property to a newly established nonprofit foundation, the Mitchell Center for Technology Innovation. The house sale was technically a separate transaction from the fund acquisition, but I had made one contingent upon the other. My attorneys had structured everything to ensure that all innocent investors would be made whole, while my father would face appropriate consequences for his actions. The agreement included his full cooperation with authorities, a lifetime ban from the securities industry, and agreement to a plea deal that would likely result in probation rather than prison time, given the full restitution to investors. With these signatures, my lead attorney explained, Nexus Innovations will immediately begin the process of notifying all affected investors that their funds will be returned in full, plus 3% interest to compensate for lost time and opportunity. 3% is generous, my father's lawyer noted, the first time she'd spoken in hours. Ms. Caldwell insisted, my attorney replied. She was particularly concerned about those investors who might face financial hardship while waiting for restitution. My father looked at me from across the table, a question in his eyes that he couldn't quite voice. Aunt Catherine needs her money back as soon as possible, I said, answering his unspoken query. She's been putting off a knee replacement because she thought she'd lost her medical fund. My mother made a small, pained sound. Catherine was her only sister, and they had once been close. The knowledge that her husband had stolen her sister's medical fund clearly cut through even her practiced composure. As the final documents were notarized and my attorneys began packing up, an unexpected weight lifted from my shoulders. This wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't sure I would ever truly forgive my parents for years of emotional neglect. But it was closure. I had faced my family from a position of strength, protected innocent people from my father's mistakes, and created something meaningful from the ashes of the Caldwell legacy. What happens now? Rebecca asked as the lawyers filed out, leaving just the four of us in the dining room. Now, you all begin rebuilding your lives, I said simply. The trust we've established will provide for basic living expenses for the next 5 years. That should be enough time for you and Mom to find employment and for Dad to complete whatever community service his plea agreement requires. And the house? My mother asked, looking around the dining room with its crystal, chandelier, and hand-painted wallpaper she'd commissioned from a European artist. Construction begins next month. The Educational Foundation takes possession in 2 weeks, but I've arranged for you to have until the end of the month to remove personal belongings. My mother nodded stiffly. There's quite a bit to sort through. 30 years of memories. I suggest focusing on the truly meaningful items, I said, thinking of the basement full of holiday decorations that hadn't made the cut for my mother's perfect displays. The house has 4 storage rooms filled with things you haven't looked at in years. And you? My father asked. You'll return to Seattle? Tonight, I confirmed. I have a company to run. Will we? Will we see you again? The vulnerability in his question caught me by surprise. Richard Caldwell had never shown weakness, had never admitted to needing anyone, least of all his overlooked elder daughter. I'll be back periodically to oversee the Mitchell Center's development. And I hesitated, uncertain if I was opening a door that should remain closed. And perhaps next Christmas, if you'd like, we could meet somewhere. Not here, obviously, but somewhere neutral, to start building something new. The hope that flashed across my father's face was painful to witness. A drowning man glimpsing a distant shore. My mother remained impassive, but Rebecca gave a small, tentative smile. I'd like that, she said softly. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a Caldwell heirloom that would now belong to the foundation, chimed noon. I stood, gathering my portfolio and phone. I should go. Final meetings with the legal team, and then my flight back to Seattle. They walked me to the door, an awkward procession of people who shared DNA but had never truly known each other. At the threshold, my mother suddenly reached out and touched my arm, the first physical contact she had initiated in years. Why are you naming it after your grandmother? She asked. You could have put your own name on it, or Nexus. I looked into her eyes, seeing genuine confusion. Because Grandmother Mitchell was the only one who ever saw me clearly. She recognized my potential when the rest of you were too busy applauding Rebecca. She bought me computer books when you were signing. Rebecca up for cotillion. She listened when you were too busy to hear. I didn't know, my mother whispered, about the books. There's a lot you didn't know about me, Mom. That was always the problem. I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, breathing deeply, as I walked down the path toward the waiting car. Behind me stood the house that had never been a true home to me. Ahead lay a future I had built for myself, brick by brick, code by code, choice by choice. The following spring, I returned to Boston for the grand opening of the Mitchell Center for Technology Innovation. The transformation of the Maple Avenue property was remarkable. The formal dining room where we had signed the legal documents 6 months earlier was now a state-of-the-art computer lab, its walls lined with sleek workstations instead of my mother's cherished Limoges china. The living room had become a collaborative workspace with modular furniture and interactive whiteboards. My father's study, once forbidden territory to me, was now the center's library, filled with books on coding, robotics, and digital design. Only one room remained relatively unchanged, my grandmother's former bedroom, which now served as my office during my visits. I had preserved her window seat where we used to sit together during her visits, she reading to me while my parents fawned over Rebecca downstairs. The center's first cohort included 25 girls from underserved communities across Massachusetts. They ranged in age from 12 to 17, each selected based on aptitude, interest, and need. Many came from schools without advanced computer classes or homes without reliable internet access. All of them reminded me, in different ways, of my younger self, bright, curious, and overlooked. On opening day, I stood on the front steps of the building to address the assembled crowd of students, parents, educators, and press. The Boston Globe had run a feature on the center that morning, highlighting both its educational mission and the unusual circumstances of its founding. Tech entrepreneur transforms family home into innovation center for girls, the headline had read, with a smaller sub-headline, Daughter salvages legacy from father's financial scandal. Welcome to the Mitchell Center for Technology Innovation, I began, looking out at the eager faces of our first students. This building has a long history. For decades, it was a family home, a place that represented certain values and traditions. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of unexpected movement. My parents and Rebecca stood at the edge of the crowd, having arrived quietly and without announcement. I hadn't seen them since Christmas, when we had met for an awkward but civil dinner at a restaurant in neutral territory, as promised. Today, this building begins a new chapter, I continued, recovering from my surprise. No longer a private home for one family, but a center of opportunity for many. A place where young women will develop the skills and confidence to enter fields where they have historically been underrepresented. I spoke about the curriculum, the mentorship program we had established with leading tech companies, and the residential summer intensives planned for rural students. Throughout it all, my family remained silent observers, Rebecca occasionally nodding at points that resonated with her. After the ceremonial ribbon cutting and tours of the facility, I finally approached them as the crowd dispersed. I didn't know you were coming, I said. We weren't sure we would, my father admitted. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by something more settled. Thanks to my intervention and his full cooperation, he had indeed avoided prison, receiving instead 5 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. But we wanted to see it, to understand. It's impressive, Rebecca said, seeming genuinely admiring. Those girls, the way they looked at you, like you're their hero or something. Not a hero, I corrected. Just someone who sees their potential. My mother had remained silent, her gaze fixed on the building that had once been her showplace. "You kept the exterior mostly the same," she finally observed. "The colors, the landscaping." "It seemed important to maintain the historic character," I replied. "The changes are inside, where they matter most." She nodded, something like respect flickering across her face. "You've done something meaningful here, Olivia. Not what I would have done, but meaningful nonetheless." Coming from Diane Caldwell, this was the equivalent of effusive praise. "Would you like a tour?" I offered, surprising myself with the invitation. They accepted, and I led them through the transformed spaces of their former home. My father lingered in the computer lab, asking technical questions that revealed an unexpected interest in the center's mission. Rebecca seemed drawn to the collaborative workspace, commenting on the innovative design. My mother said little, but I caught her nodding approvingly at the quality of the renovations. "And this was your grandmother's room," I said as we reached my office. "You kept her window seat," my mother noted, running her hand along the cushioned bench where I had spent countless hours with my grandmother. "It was important to me." "She always favored you," my mother said, but without the bitterness that would have colored such a statement in the past. I resented it at the time. I thought she was undermining my parenting by treating you differently than we did. "She wasn't playing favorites, Mom. She was compensating for the fact that you and Dad did." My mother didn't deny it, which was perhaps the closest she would ever come to acknowledging the truth of my childhood. "She would be proud of this place," she said instead. "Proud of you." After they left, I sat in my grandmother's window seat, watching as they walked to their car, a modest sedan that had replaced my father's luxury vehicles. They moved differently now, without the entitled confidence that had once characterized their bearing. The Caldwell fall from grace had been complete, their social standing in Boston irreparably damaged by my father's crimes. Yet there was something almost liberating in their diminished circumstances. Freed from the exhausting performance of perfection, they seemed more human, more authentic than I had ever known them to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "How did the opening go? Wish I could have been there." "It went well," I replied. "Students are amazing." Parents showed up unexpectedly. "Wow, how was that?" I considered the question, trying to articulate the complex emotions of the day. "Healing," I finally wrote, in a way I didn't expect. Because that was the truth. In transforming my childhood, house of pain, into a place of opportunity for others, I had also transformed something within myself. The basement-dwelling daughter had not just emerged into the light, she had become the light, illuminating paths for girls who might otherwise have remained in shadows, just as I once had. That evening, after the last of the staff had gone home, I walked through the quiet building, listening to the settling sounds of the old house. In the main hallway, I had created a small exhibit honoring Eleanor Mitchell, my grandmother. Photos showed her as a young woman in the 1940s, one of the few female mathematics students at her university. Later images captured her working with early computers as a programmer for an insurance company in the 1960s, a career she had abandoned when she married my grandfather. "I could have done so much more if I'd had the opportunities," she once told me as we sat together in her window seat. "Promise me you won't let anyone limit what you can become, Olivia." I had kept that promise, though the path had been harder and lonelier than either of us could have imagined. Now I was creating opportunities for girls who reminded me of myself and of my grandmother. Girls who deserved to be seen for their potential, not overlooked because they didn't fit someone else's expectations. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a small framed photo I hadn't noticed before, placed on a side table near the entrance. It showed a teenage girl with glasses and an awkward smile, sitting at a bulky desktop computer. Me, at 14, absorbed in writing my first major piece of code. I picked up the frame, confused. This wasn't part of the official exhibit I had approved. Turning it over, I found a note taped to the back in handwriting I recognized as my mother's. Found this while cleaning out the attic. Thought it belonged here. DC. The photo must have been taken by my grandmother. I had no memory of anyone else ever documenting my early interest in computers. That my mother had found it, kept it, and now returned it to me in this way felt significant. A small acknowledgement of the girl I had been and the woman I had become without her support or recognition. I replaced the photo on the table, positioning it so visitors would see it as they entered. A reminder that even overlooked daughters can build meaningful lives and create positive change in the world. Outside, twilight had settled over Boston, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the deepening blue sky. Soon I would return to Seattle, to Eliza, to the life and company I had built there. But part of me would remain here, in this building that had been transformed from a symbol of my exclusion to a testament to my resilience. The basement was gone now, converted into a bright, open innovation lab with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in abundant natural light. No more cold nights on a musty pull-out couch. No more listening to family festivities from which I was excluded. In its place stood a space where young minds would be nurtured, where potential would be recognized and celebrated, where no one would be relegated to the shadows. As I locked the front door behind me, I felt a sense of completion, not of my life's work, which was ongoing, but of a particular chapter that had needed resolution. The Caldwell family home was now the Mitchell Center, and I was no longer defined by my relationship to that family or that home. I was Olivia Caldwell, founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, creator of the Mitchell Center, partner to Eliza, mentor to young women in technology. I was defined by what I had built, not by what I had been denied. And that perhaps was the greatest transformation of all. The following Christmas Eve, snow fell gently over a small restaurant in Cambridge, where 4 people sat at a corner table, sharing a meal that was neither lavish nor austere. My parents and Rebecca had accepted my invitation for a holiday dinner, our new tradition, I had suggested, without the pressures and performances of the past. They arrived with small, thoughtfully chosen gifts, books on technology ethics for me, a handcrafted scarf from a local artisan for Eliza, who had flown in from Seattle to join us. No extravagant presents designed to impress, just simple offerings that showed more care than any gift they had given me in the past. To new beginnings, my father toasted, raising his glass of sparkling water. His probation prohibited alcohol, a restriction he had embraced as part of his rehabilitation. And to seeing clearly, my mother added, her eyes meeting mine with unexpected warmth. Rebecca, who had recently started a modest marketing consultancy after being unable to find work in finance due to her association with our father's scandal, reached across the table to squeeze my hand. To sisters, she said softly, and second chances. Eliza watched this exchange with gentle curiosity, having heard so much about my family, but meeting them for the first time. Later, as we walked back to our hotel through the snow-covered streets, she linked her arm through mine. They're trying, she observed, in their own way. Yes, I agreed. It's not perfect, it probably never will be. But it's real, which is more than we ever had before. That night, in our comfortable hotel suite, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the cold basement to the warm light of a life I had created on my own terms. From the overlooked daughter to a woman standing in her full power, capable of both setting boundaries and extending compassion. The Mitchell Center would welcome its second cohort of students in the spring. Nexus Innovations was thriving, our healthcare management software now used in hospitals across the country. Eliza and I were discussing marriage, a future together built on mutual respect and genuine love. And my family, the people who had once defined me by my exclusion, were slowly learning to see me as I truly was. not through the distorted lens of their expectations or comparisons, but as an individual worthy of recognition and respect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be awkward moments, old patterns that threatened to resurface, wounds that hadn't fully healed. But it was a beginning, authentic and hard-won. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the basement, that no longer existed, transformed now into a place of innovation and possibility. Like so many women before me, I had taken the space I was relegated to and transformed it into something powerful. I had refused to remain in the darkness, instead becoming a source of light for others. That, perhaps, was the most profound form of success, not measured in dollars or status, but in impact, in transformation, in the courage to build something meaningful from the very foundation of what once caused pain, from the basement to the boardroom, from overlooked to empowered, from exclusion to creation. That was my story, and I was still writing it, one bold decision at a time. 2 years after the opening of the Mitchell Center, I found myself standing before an audience of 500 at the Women in Technology Summit in San Francisco. The journey from basement-dwelling daughter to keynote speaker at one of the industry's most prestigious conferences wasn't one I had envisioned for myself, but life has a way of creating unexpected paths from our deepest wounds. Transformation isn't just about changing circumstances, I told the rapt audience. It's about changing perspectives. It's about recognizing that the very spaces where we've felt most restricted can become launching pads for our greatest contributions. From my vantage point on stage, I could see the faces of women who'd broken barriers in Silicon Valley, young coders just starting their journeys, and, in the second row, 5 teenage girls wearing matching navy blue blazers with the Mitchell Center logo, our first graduating cohort, now preparing for college with full STEM scholarships. When I renovated my childhood home into an education center for underserved girls, many people called it revenge, I continued. They assumed I was trying to erase painful memories or punish my family for years of inequitable treatment. I paused, letting my gaze drift over the audience. But transformation runs deeper than revenge. Revenge keeps you tethered to pain. Transformation releases you from it, while creating ripples of positive change that extend far beyond your own experience. As I spoke, I thought about those ripples. How one decision to convert a basement into a technology lab had sparked a movement that now included 3 Mitchell Centers across the Northeast, with a 4th breaking ground in Chicago the following month. How our graduates were entering elite computer science programs and bringing diversity to internship programs at major tech firms. How the story of a daughter converting her family home after her father's financial disgrace had captured media attention and brought crucial funding to our mission. After my speech, during the networking reception, I was approached by a distinguished woman in her 60s, her silver hair cut in a precise bob, her handshake firm and confident. Marguerite Herrera, she introduced herself. I'm the director of the National Foundation for Women in Computing. I recognized both the name and the organization immediately. The NFWC was the country's largest nonprofit dedicated to increasing female representation in computer science. Your work has caught our attention, Ms. Caldwell, she continued, particularly your focus on identifying talent in communities that traditional programs overlook. Thank you, I replied. That's at the core of our mission, which is why I'd like to discuss a potential partnership. She handed me a business card embossed with the NFWC logo. We're launching a national initiative to establish 50 technology centers for girls over the next decade. Your Mitchell Centers provide a model we'd like to expand. My heart raced at the implication. A national partnership would exponentially increase our impact, bringing technological education to thousands more girls who might otherwise never discover their aptitude for coding or engineering. I'd be very interested in continuing this conversation, I said, already mentally calculating how such an expansion might work. Excellent. My office will contact yours tomorrow to set up a formal meeting. She paused, studying me with shrewd eyes. "I've followed your story, Ms. Caldwell. The basement. At Christmas. The family scandal. Your response to it all. It's quite remarkable." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest whenever my personal history came up in professional contexts. "The centers are what matter," I said, "not how I came to create them." "On the contrary," Marguerite countered, "how you came to create them is precisely what matters. You transformed personal pain into public purpose. That's why your model works. It's authentic. It comes from lived experience, not corporate social responsibility calculations." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by an excited voice. "Ms. Caldwell, we got in." Jasmine, one of the Mitchell Center students who had attended my keynote, rushed toward us, waving her phone. The other 4 girls followed closely behind, their faces alight with shared excitement. "MIT just sent the email. Early admission for all 5 of us." Jasmine was practically bouncing as she showed me her acceptance letter. "We're going to be in the same freshman cohort." The pride that surged through me was unlike anything I'd experienced in my corporate success. These girls, bright, ambitious, and once overlooked just as I had been, were heading to one of the world's premier technology institutions. The same school that had rejected me years ago when my parents had refused to help with tuition, forcing me to attend a state university instead. I hugged each girl in turn, their enthusiasm infectious. "This is incredible news. I knew you could do it." "We couldn't have done it without you in the center," said Amara, the quietest of the group, whose talent for algorithmic thinking reminded me of myself at her age. "My high school doesn't even offer AP computer science." "You did the work," I insisted. "The center just gave you the tools." As the girls excitedly discussed their MIT futures, Marguerite observed our interaction with a small smile. "This is exactly why we need to talk," she said quietly. "What you've built needs to be replicated nationwide." That evening, back in Tawin City, my hotel suite, I called Eliza with the news about NFWC's interest and the students' MIT acceptances. "That's incredible, love," she said, her pride evident even through the phone. "Both the partnership and your students. Though I'm not surprised about either." "It feels surreal," I admitted, kicking off my heels and sinking onto the couch. "When I started the first center, I was just trying to create something meaningful from a painful situation. I never imagined it becoming a national model." "That's because you were focused on solving a real problem, not chasing recognition," Eliza replied. "Speaking of recognition, did you see the Boston Globe piece?" "No. What piece?" "Hold on. I'll send it to you now." Moments later, my phone pinged with a message containing a link to an article titled, "From Financial Disgrace to Public Service: The Caldwell Family's Unexpected Legacy." My stomach tightened as I began to read. The article detailed my father's journey from disgraced investment manager to dedicated community servant. After completing his probation and community service hours, he had continued volunteering with a financial literacy program for low-income families, eventually becoming its director. The program taught basic budgeting, saving strategies, and how to avoid predatory lending, skills that many of his former wealthy clients had never needed, but which were critical for families living paycheck to paycheck. The article quoted my father. "My daughter taught me that true redemption isn't about restoring what was lost, but about creating something better from what remains. She transformed our family home into an education center that changes lives. I'm trying, in my much smaller way, to use my financial knowledge to help people who never had the advantages I took for granted." I set down my phone, emotions churning. My father's rehabilitation had been a slow, complicated process. Our relationship had improved but remained cautious, with boundaries I enforced firmly. This public acknowledgement of my influence on his journey was unexpected. "Are you okay?" Eliza asked after my long silence. "I think so," I said slowly. It's just strange to see him publicly crediting me for his change in perspective. Is it accurate? I considered the question. Yes, actually. That's what makes it strange. He's acknowledging something I never thought he'd recognize. After finishing my call with Eliza, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in the years since I'd arrived at my parents' door with a proposal that altered all our trajectories. My father's transformation from entitled financier to humble community educator. My mother's shift from social climber to part-time art teacher at a senior center. Rebecca's evolution from golden child to hardworking small business owner who now occasionally volunteered at the Mitchell Center, teaching marketing skills to our students. And my own journey, from the basement-dwelling daughter desperate for validation to a woman comfortable in her own accomplishments, no longer seeking approval from those who had withheld it for so long. The next morning, I met with Marguerite and her team at NFWC headquarters. The potential partnership they outlined was more comprehensive than I'd expected, a plan to establish Mitchell-inspired centers in all 50 states over the next decade, with significant funding from both corporate sponsors and federal grants. We don't want to simply replicate your physical model, Marguerite explained as we reviewed the proposal. We want to incorporate your philosophy, identifying girls with aptitude rather than just interest, focusing on communities where technological education is limited, providing both technical skills and leadership development. And mentorship, I added. That's essential to our approach. Every student is paired with a woman working in the tech industry who can provide guidance and real-world perspective. Absolutely, Marguerite agreed. In fact, we'd like to formalize that aspect into a national mentorship network. By the end of the 4-hour meeting, we had outlined a framework for collaboration that would maintain the Mitchell Center's core values while expanding their reach exponentially. I left feeling both exhilarated and slightly overwhelmed by the scope of what we were undertaking. As I walked through San Francisco's financial district toward my next meeting, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Boston number. Olivia Caldwell, I answered. Ms. Caldwell, this is Catherine Mitchell. My aunt's voice was instantly recognizable, though we hadn't spoken directly in years. My relationship with my mother's sister had been cordial but distant, complicated by family dynamics and my father's betrayal of her trust. Aunt Catherine, I said, surprised. Is everything all right? Yes, everything's fine. I'm calling. Because. She hesitated. I saw the article about your father's financial literacy work, and I've been following the success of the centers you've named after my mother. My grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, had been Catherine's mother as well, though Catherine had never shown the same closeness to her that I had experienced. The centers are doing well, I confirmed, unsure where the conversation was heading. I should have reached out sooner, Catherine said, her voice softening. When you arranged for my investment to be returned after Richard's fund collapsed, that saved me from having to sell my home. I've never properly thanked you. It was the right thing to do, I said simply. You were an innocent victim in all of it. Perhaps. She paused again. But there's another reason I'm calling. I've been going through Mother's things, finally, after all these years. And I've found some items I think should go to the Mitchell Center. Or to you personally. What kind of items? I asked, intrigued. Mother's papers from her time as a programmer in the 60s. Technical manuals she annotated, journals about her work, and photographs, quite a few with you as a girl, working on your first computer. She kept everything related to your interest in technology. A lump formed in my throat. I'd had so few tangible connections to my grandmother after her death. To discover this archive of her technological work, and her documentation of our shared interest, felt like finding a missing piece of myself. That's incredibly meaningful, Aunt Catherine. I'd be honored to have those items for the center's historical collection. There's one more thing, she added. A letter Mother left for you. It was in a sealed envelope with instructions that it be given to you when you've found your path. I think that time has clearly come. We arranged for the materials to be shipped to the Boston Mitchell Center, where I'd retrieve them during my next visit. After ending the call, I stood for a moment on the busy sidewalk, pedestrians streaming around me, feeling a connection through time to the grandmother who had seen my potential when no one else did. That evening, after a full day of meetings, I found myself drawn to visit the San Francisco Museum of Innovation, where a special exhibit on women in computing history was currently featured. The museum was nearly empty at this late hour, allowing me to wander through the exhibit in contemplative silence. I paused before a display about early female programmers, women who had written code for ENIAC and other first-generation computers when programming was considered clerical work suitable for women before it became prestigious and male-dominated. My grandmother had been among this pioneering generation, though her contributions were too small to merit museum recognition. Inspiration strikes in unexpected places, doesn't it? I turned to find Marguerite Herrera standing beside me, studying the same display. "I didn't realize you'd be here," I said. "This exhibit was partly funded by our foundation," she explained. "I try to visit whenever I'm in San Francisco. These women's stories deserve to be told." We moved through the exhibit together, pausing before photographs of women hunched over massive computers, punch cards in hand, their contributions largely forgotten by history. "Do you know what I find most remarkable about these pioneers?" Marguerite asked as we studied a group photo from 1962. "What's that?" They didn't know they were making history. They were just doing work they found fascinating, often in basements and back rooms, while men took credit for their innovations. She glanced at me meaningfully. "Rather like someone else I know." "The parallel isn't lost on me," I admitted. "My grandmother was part of this generation. She gave up her programming career when she married, but she never lost her fascination with technology. She was the one who encouraged my interest in computers when I was young." "And now you're carrying forward her legacy," Marguerite observed, "creating opportunities she never had." We completed our tour of the exhibit and found ourselves in the museum's quiet courtyard, San Francisco's lights twinkling around us in the evening darkness. "I've been thinking about your story, Olivia," Marguerite said as we sat on a bench near a sculptural fountain. "About how you transformed that basement experience into something powerful." "I didn't set out to create a movement," I said. "I just wanted to make meaning from something painful." "That's often how the most significant changes begin," she replied. "Not with grand plans, but with personal insights that reveal universal truths. You recognize that being relegated to the basement wasn't just about you. It was about how society overlooks certain kinds of talent and potential. You turned a personal slight into a platform for systemic change." Her words resonated with something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. My journey from the basement to the Mitchell Centers wasn't just about proving my family wrong or healing my own wounds. It was about recognizing that my experience reflected broader patterns of overlooked potential and doing something to address that larger issue. "The most powerful form of healing isn't forgetting pain," Marguerite continued. "It's transforming it into purpose." "Is that why you started the National Foundation?" I asked, suddenly curious about her personal motivation. She smiled slightly. "Perceptive question, yes, in a way. I was the only female computer science major in my program in 1975. My professor told me on the first day that I was taking a spot that should have gone to a man who would actually use the degree. I graduated top of my class and went on to design operating systems for 3 decades. And then founded an organization to ensure no other girl would be told she didn't belong in technology," I finished. "Precisely." She checked her watch. "I should be going. Early flight tomorrow. But I want you to know that what you've built with the Mitchell Centers isn't just impressive. It's necessary. And with our partnership, we can ensure that thousands more girls will never experience the basement effect." "The basement effect," I repeated. I like that terminology. The systematic relegation of certain people to less desirable spaces, literal or figurative, based on biased perceptions of their value and potential. Marguerite stood. You've created an antidote, and together we're going to distribute it nationwide. After she left, I remained in the courtyard, considering how a simple decision to transform my childhood home had evolved into something far greater than I'd imagined. The ripples had become waves, affecting lives far beyond my original vision. The following week, back in Boston for MIT's Alumni Innovation Conference, I made time to visit the original Mitchell Center. Walking through its doors still gave me a peculiar feeling, the building's exterior so familiar, its interior now so transformed from the house where I'd never truly belonged. In the reception area, a new installation had been added since my last visit, a wall of firsts, celebrating the achievements of our students and graduates. First place at the state robotics competition. First published research paper in an academic journal. First patent application. First college scholarship. First internship at Google. Among these accomplishments was a framed acceptance letter from MIT with Jasmine's name, representing all 5 of our students who would be attending in the fall. Beside it hung a photograph of the girls standing with me at the Women in Technology Summit, their faces radiating pride and possibility. As I studied the display, Marisol Diaz, the center's director, appeared beside me. Quite a collection of firsts, she said warmly. And it keeps growing. We just heard that Amara's algorithm has been accepted for presentation at the International Computing Conference. She'll be the youngest presenter in the event's history. That's incredible, I replied, thinking of the quiet girl whose talent had reminded me of my younger self. Has she heard yet? Not yet. We wanted to surprise her when she comes in for her mentor session this afternoon. Marisol gestured toward my office. Oh, and a package arrived for you yesterday. From Catherine Mitchell. We've placed it on your desk. In my office, the room that had once been my grandmother's, I found a carefully packed archival box. Inside were folders of yellowed papers covered in my grandmother's precise handwriting, technical manuals with her annotations in the margins, and photographs I'd never seen before. Eleanor Mitchell standing beside an early IBM computer, her hand resting proudly on its massive frame. My grandmother teaching a programming class, a rare female instructor in a sea of male students. And most precious of all, a series of photos of my grandmother and me, hunched together over my first computer, her patient guidance evident in the way she pointed at the screen. And at the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's distinctive script. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a letter dated just 3 months before her death. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then you have indeed found your path, as I always knew you would. From the first moment I saw you methodically, arranging your building blocks in patterns that revealed your systematic mind, I recognized in you the same passion for logic and problem-solving that drove my own work with early computers. I've instructed Catherine to give you this letter and my professional papers when the time is right, when you've discovered how to use your exceptional gifts despite the limitations others may place upon you. My darling girl, I've watched with both pride and sadness as your parents have consistently overlooked your remarkable mind, your persistence, your creativity. They cannot see what I see so clearly, that you possess not just intelligence, but the rarer quality of vision, the ability to perceive solutions where others see only obstacles. In my generation, women like me were frequently relegated to the computational equivalent of basements. Our work essential but unacknowledged, our contributions vital but invisible. We wrote the code that sent men to the moon, yet our names rarely appeared in the histories of those achievements. You may face similar challenges, different in form but familiar in essence. When you do, remember this: basement dwellers develop unique strengths. We learn to create light in darkness. We build foundations that support structures we may never be invited to enter. We develop resilience that those who have always lived in sunlight cannot comprehend. Whatever path you choose, and I have every confidence it will be extraordinary, never forget that your worth is not determined by others' recognition of it. The most revolutionary ideas often germinate in basements, away from the scrutiny that might wither them before they can flourish. You, my Olivia, are meant for more than the limited role your parents envision for you. Your mind is a rare instrument. Trust it. Follow where it leads you, and know that wherever my soul resides when you read these words, I am watching your journey with endless pride and love. Your eternally devoted grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading, the letter connecting me across time to the woman who had first recognized my potential. She had seen so clearly what was coming, the challenges I would face, the strengths I would develop from adversity, the unique perspective that being overlooked would give me. And she had been right. The basement experiences, literal and metaphorical, had shaped me in ways that privilege never could have. They had given me empathy for the overlooked, determination born of self-reliance, and a drive to create spaces where others like me could flourish in the light rather than struggle in shadows. I carefully refolded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, then went to the window seat where my grandmother and I had spent so many hours together. Outside, a group of Mitchell Center students were arriving for their afternoon session, laughing and talking excitedly as they entered the building that had once been a symbol of my exclusion and was now a beacon of inclusion. The ripple effect continued, expanding outward from that first transformative decision to turn pain into purpose. From basements to breakthrough opportunities, from overlooked potential to world-changing possibilities. And I was just getting started. 5 years after the national expansion of the Mitchell Centers began, I stood in the gleaming lobby of our newest facility, the 50th Center, representing our presence in every state. The Chicago location was our largest yet, a renovated warehouse in a formerly industrial neighborhood that now housed 6 floors of technology labs, classroom spaces, mentor offices, and a rooftop garden where students could code in the open air. "Quite different from a basement, isn't it?" Eliza said quietly beside me, squeezing my hand as we surveyed the soaring space with its wall of screens displaying real-time projects from Mitchell Centers across the country. "Just a bit," I agreed with a smile. Our relationship had evolved alongside the centers. 3 years ago, we'd married in a small ceremony on the grounds of the original Boston Mitchell Center, exchanging vows in the garden where my grandmother's favorite roses now bloomed. Eliza had left her marine biology research position to become the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Mitchell Foundation, integrating environmental science into our curriculum and establishing our green computing initiative. Today was the formal dedication of the Chicago Center, and the lobby was filling with guests, corporate sponsors, local officials, educators, and most importantly, the first cohort of 60 Chicago students, identified through our talent search program in underserved schools throughout the city. Looking at their faces, eager, nervous, full of potential, I felt the familiar surge of purpose that had driven me since that first transformative decision to convert my family home. These girls, like hundreds before them across the nation, would have opportunities that might otherwise have been denied them. They would develop their talents in environments designed for their success, guided by mentors who recognized their value. 5-minute warning, Ms. Caldwell-Santiago, said Dina, our national program director, approaching with a tablet in hand. Full house, standing room only in the auditorium. Thank you, Dina. And our special guests? I asked. All here, seated, in the front row, as requested. I nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation. This dedication ceremony was different from the 49 that had preceded it. This one represented a completion, a fulfillment of the vision that had grown from personal healing to national movement. And it seemed fitting that certain people would witness this milestone. Eliza and I made our way to the auditorium, pausing, briefly outside the doors. "Ready?" she asked, straightening my lapel with a familiar gesture. Ready, I confirmed, taking a deep breath. We entered to enthusiastic applause, walking down the center aisle toward the stage. As we passed the front row, I nodded to the small group seated there, my parents looking older but more at peace than I'd ever seen them. Rebecca with her husband Michael, whom she'd met through volunteer work at the Boston Center, and Marguerite Herrera, whose partnership had made the national expansion possible. And, in a wheelchair at the end of the row, a surprise I hadn't expected, Aunt Catherine, who had rarely traveled since a stroke 3 years ago, had limited her mobility. She smiled and nodded as I passed, her presence a meaningful connection to my grandmother, whose vision had sparked everything we'd built. On stage, I took my place at the podium, surveying the packed auditorium. Tech industry leaders, educators, policymakers, media, supporters, and most importantly, students, all gathered to celebrate what had begun as one woman's response to years of being relegated to the basement. Welcome to the 50th Mitchell Center for Technology Innovation, I began. Today marks the completion of a vision that seemed almost impossible just 5 years ago. To establish a center in every state, providing technological education and mentorship to girls whose potential might otherwise go unrecognized. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the audience. But the true origin of this national network began long before the first center opened its doors. It began in a basement. For the first time publicly, I shared the full story of those Christmas basements, the years of being overlooked, the family dynamics that had shaped my early life. Not with bitterness or accusation, but as context for what followed. How those experiences had given me a unique perspective on overlooked potential, and how my family's financial collapse had created an unexpected opportunity to transform pain into purpose. The basement can be a metaphor for any space where talent is relegated rather than elevated, I continued. The back row of a classroom, the bottom of a resume pile, the wrong side of a socioeconomic divide. But basements also have unique qualities. Their foundations, supporting everything built above them. They teach resilience to those who dwell there. And most importantly, they can become launching points for transformation. I outlined the journey from that first center in Boston to the national network we celebrated today, acknowledging the corporate partners whose funding had made expansion possible, the educational institutions that had created pathways for our graduates, and the thousands of professional women who served as mentors. But numbers and statistics don't capture the true impact of the Mitchell Centers, I said. For that, we need stories. I gestured toward the side of the stage, where Jasmine, one of the original 5 students from Boston who had been accepted to MIT, now stood waiting. She had graduated with honors last year and recently joined one of Silicon Valley's most innovative artificial intelligence firms. Jasmine took the podium, her confidence a stark contrast to the shy girl I'd first met 6 years ago. Before the Mitchell Center, I didn't know anyone who looked like me in tech, she began. My high school counselor suggested I consider nursing or teaching because those were good careers for women. But Ms. Caldwell and the center showed me possibilities I'd never imagined. She described her journey from curious student to MIT graduate, now developing algorithms that help detect early indicators of climate change. But I'm just one story, she said, turning toward the projection screen behind us. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to the Mitchell Network, graduates from centers across the country who are changing the face of technology. The screen illuminated with a mosaic of faces, young women of all backgrounds, each with a caption noting their current roles. Software engineer at NASA, cybersecurity specialist at the Department of Defense, founder of an educational technology startup, lead developer for renewable energy systems, biomedical engineer designing prosthetics. The audience applauded as Jasmine concluded her remarks and returned to her seat. I stepped back to the podium, moved by the visual representation of what had grown from that first transformative decision. Each of these women was once a girl whose potential might have been overlooked, I said. Each represents not just individual success, but a shift in our collective understanding of who belongs in technology and innovation spaces. I then introduced our newest initiative, the Foundations Program, which would extend Mitchell Center resources to elementary schools in underserved communities, identifying aptitude for computational thinking at even earlier ages. We've learned that the basement effect often begins before middle school, I explained. By third grade, many girls with natural aptitude for STEM fields have already internalized the message that those spaces aren't for them. The Foundations program aims to intercept that message and replace it with invitation and opportunity. After outlining the program's structure and goals, I paused, taking a moment to acknowledge the deeper meaning of this milestone. Today isn't just about celebrating 50 centers in 50 states. It's about recognizing how personal transformation can catalyze systemic change. It's about understanding that our most painful experiences often contain the seeds of our greatest contributions. I looked directly at my parents in the front row, their expressions a mixture of pride and lingering regret. And it's about the power of rewriting narratives, both personal and societal. The basement is no longer a place of exclusion in my story. It's become the foundation of a movement that has changed thousands of lives. As I concluded my remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation. I beckoned Eliza to join me at the podium, along with Jasmine, Marguerite, and Dina, the women who had been instrumental in bringing the vision to national scale. After the ceremony, during the reception in the center's main collaborative workspace, my father approached me while I was momentarily alone, having stepped away from the crowd to collect my thoughts. "Olivia," he said quietly, "what you've built, it's extraordinary. Thank you, Dad." The formality between us had softened over the years, but our relationship remained complicated. Healing, but never fully healed. Closer, but never completely close. "I saw something today that I've never quite understood before," he continued, his voice reflective. "The way those girls look at you, it's not just admiration. It's recognition. They see themselves in you, and you in them." I nodded, surprised by his perception. That's exactly what drives the centers. Recognition of potential that others might miss. "The way we missed yours." It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement that had been years in coming. "Yes," I said simply. He looked around at the bustling reception, the animated conversations between students and tech industry leaders, the displays of innovative projects created by Mitchell Center participants. "The basements," he said quietly. "All those Christmases. I never thought." "Neither did I admitted. "But that's the thing about overlooked spaces, Dad. They often contain exactly what we most need to see." A comfortable silence fell between us, not the tense, awkward silences of the past, but a moment of shared understanding. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud," he finally said, "not just of the centers, but of you, the woman you've become." "I know," I replied, thinking of her letter. She saw it before anyone else did. Across the room, I spotted Rebecca deep in conversation with two Chicago students, showing them something on a tablet. My sister had surprised us all by becoming one of our most dedicated volunteers, regularly running marketing workshops at the Boston Center and helping students develop personal branding strategies for college applications. The Golden Child had developed a genuine passion for mentoring, finding purpose in helping others that her corporate career had never provided. My mother stood nearby, watching the interaction with a small smile. Our relationship had evolved the most slowly, weighted by years of barbed comments and dismissals. But time had brought a measure of mutual respect, if not the closeness I had once craved. She now lived in a modest townhouse with my father, teaching art classes at a community center and, somewhat ironically, serving on the design committee for new Mitchell Centers. Mom seems to be enjoying herself, I observed. She is, my father confirmed. She would never say it, but I think she's proud of how you've incorporated her design sensibilities into the centers. That curved staircase was her suggestion, wasn't it? I nodded. It was a good one. The students love studying in the nooks along the risers. My father glanced at his watch. We should probably let you get back to your guests. I know how these events go. Everyone wants a moment with the visionary. Stay for dinner, I said impulsively. All of you, Mom, Rebecca, Michael, and Aunt Catherine, of course. Eliza and I are hosting a small gathering at our hotel suite later. Just close friends and family. Surprise flickered across his face. Are you sure? This is your big moment. You don't need family complications. I'm sure, I replied, realizing I meant it. It seems fitting somehow. As he moved away to share the invitation with the others, Eliza appeared at my side. Everything okay? She asked, noting my pensive expression. Better than okay, I said. I just invited my family to dinner. She raised an eyebrow. The Christmas Basement Brigade? All of them? All of them. I smiled at her protective skepticism. It feels right. Full circle in a way. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of introductions, conversations, and photographs. I made sure to speak personally with each of the 60 new Chicago students, asking about their interests and aspirations. Their energy and optimism were infectious, their potential palpable. Some reminded me of myself at their age, quiet but determined, their minds already mapping possibilities others couldn't see. Others had a confidence I'd never possessed as a teen, boldly claiming space in a field that had historically excluded girls like them. Later that evening, in our hotel suite with its panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, I found myself in the surreal position of hosting my family for a celebratory dinner. Eliza had arranged for private catering, transforming the suite's dining area into an elegant setting for 10. My parents, Rebecca and Michael, Aunt Catherine with her nurse, Marguerite, Jasmine, who'd become like family, and ourselves. As wine was poured and appetizers served, I observed the relaxed interactions around the table. My father discussing community financial education with Marguerite. My mother engaged in conversation about sustainable architecture with Eliza. Rebecca showing photos of her nonprofit marketing clients to Jasmine, who offered suggestions for their digital strategies. And Catherine, who had barely spoken during the reception, now animated as she described to Michael the early days of computer programming, the room-sized machines, the punch cards, the women who wrote code before coding was considered prestigious. My mother, Olivia's grandmother, was among them, she said. Eleanor could see patterns in code that others missed. She would have thrived in today's technology world. She lives on through the centers, Marguerite commented. Her vision, embodied in brick and glass and curriculum. Catherine nodded, then turned to me with unexpected earnestness. I have something for you, Olivia. I wasn't sure when to give it to you, but perhaps now is appropriate. Her nurse handed her a small velvet box, which Catherine passed to me across the table. This belonged to Mother, she explained. She wanted you to have it, but I held on to it after she died. Selfishly, perhaps. But seeing what you've created, what her influence helped shape, I know it's time. I opened the box to find an elegant silver brooch in the shape of an infinity symbol, small diamonds embedded along its curves. It was her celebration gift. To herself when she completed her first major programming project in 1958, Catherine explained. A rare moment of professional recognition in a time when women's contributions were often invisible. She called it her infinity pin because she believed knowledge, once created, continues expanding forever. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. AI, perfect representation of what we'd built with the Mitchell Centers. Knowledge and opportunity expanding in ever-widening circles. This is incredible, Aunt Catherine. Thank you for preserving it all these years. It belongs with you, she said simply. The true inheritor of Eleanor's legacy. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed with surprising ease. Old tensions seemed to have dissolved, replaced by a shared pride in what the Mitchell Centers had become. Even my mother, who had once been so dismissive of my technological interests, asked thoughtful questions about our curriculum and student outcomes. After dessert was served, my father unexpectedly tapped his glass for attention. "I hope you'll indulge me for a moment," he began. "This is a celebration of an extraordinary achievement. 50 centers, thousands of students, countless lives changed. But for our family, it represents something even more profound." He looked directly at me, his expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. "Olivia, when your mother and I relegated you to the basement during those Christmas gatherings, we thought we were simply making practical arrangements. We didn't understand the message we were sending about your place in our family. And when you showed up at our door after my disgrace with a proposal that saved us from complete ruin, you had every right to demand acknowledgement of that hurt." The table had gone completely silent, everyone watching this unexpected moment unfold. Instead, you channeled that experience into creating spaces where no girl would ever feel relegated to the basement of opportunity. You transformed our failure as parents into a foundation for others' success. His voice caught slightly. "I can think of no more profound act of both justice and mercy." My mother reached for his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "What your father is trying to say, in his roundabout way, is that we are deeply sorry for the pain we caused you, and immensely proud of the woman you've become despite our shortcomings." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "You turned the basement into a launchpad, Liv, for yourself and for thousands of girls who might otherwise have been overlooked, just as you were." I felt Eliza's hand on my knee under the table, a silent gesture of support. This was the acknowledgement I had once desperately craved, recognition not just of my success, but of the journey that had shaped it. "Thank you," I said simply. The basement experiences taught me to see potential where others might not look. They made me sensitive to talent that exists on margins and in shadows. In a strange way, they prepared me precisely for this work. Marguerite raised her glass. To basements transformed into foundations, and to Olivia, who showed us all how personal healing can become public purpose. As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a sense of completion unlike anything I'd experienced before. Not because I had finally received my family's approval, I no longer needed that validation, but because the story had come full circle. The basement-dwelling daughter had not only emerged into the light, but had created light for countless others. The relegation that had once felt like rejection had become the genesis of a movement. Later that night, after our guests had departed and Eliza had fallen asleep, I stood by the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the city lights. I pinned my grandmother's infinity brooch to my robe, its diamonds catching the ambient glow of the urban landscape below. In the window's reflection, I could almost see the ghostly image of that young girl relegated to the basement, huddled under blankets while family celebrations continued without her above. I wished I could tell her what her future held. How the pain of exclusion would ultimately fuel a mission of inclusion. How the basement would become not just a metaphor for overlooked potential, but a launching point for a movement that would change thousands of lives. But perhaps she had known even then. Perhaps something in her had recognized, as my grandmother had, that basements contain unique perspective, that foundations, by definition, support everything built above them, that sometimes, the overlooked, spaces are precisely where the most revolutionary ideas germinate. I touched the infinity pin, feeling its cool silver against my fingertips. Knowledge, once created, continues expanding forever. The Mitchell Centers would continue growing, evolving, identifying overlooked talent, and nurturing it into full expression, The ripples would become waves, and the waves would reshape shores far beyond my own reach. From basement to breakthrough, from exclusion to expansion, from wound to wisdom. The transformation was never just about me. It was about recognizing that personal healing and public purpose can be two aspects of the same journey, that our deepest hurts often connect us to our most meaningful contributions, that basements, literal and metaphorical, contain not just darkness, but unrealized possibility, and that sometimes the most powerful response to being overlooked is to become someone who ensures others are truly seen. As I turned from the window to join Eliza in sleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. The basement Christmas daughter had found her purpose, her partner, her path. The journey wasn't perfect. Family relationships remained complex, old wounds occasionally reopened, new challenges continually emerged. But the basement was no longer a place of pain in my story. It had become the foundation of everything I'd built, solid, supporting, essential. And there was a certain poetic justice in that transformation that no amount of revenge could ever have provided. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.